From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe.
I'm Joe Matthew. She's Kaylee Lines. On the eve of the 2-year mark of the war in Ukraine, the Biden administration announces a new round of sanctions on Russia, targeting more than 500 entities. Jane Harman will be with us at the end of what's been a long week.
It has indeed. And of course, with aid to Ukraine stalled in the House of Representatives, some supporters are looking to make a move around Speaker Mike Johnson. Congressman Bill Pascrell of New Jersey will join with more on the effort.
Plus, ahead of tomorrow's primary in South Carolina, where Donald Trump is expected to trounce former Governor Nikki Haley, Donald Trump weighs in on the controversy around IVF, just one of the stories that we're following here. Kaylee, that the Capitol will join us at some point here soon, I'm sure. It's nice to see you back in Washington.
It's nice to see you back in Washington, where, of course, there is no shortage of news on a Friday. We began today, as we knew we would, with more sanctions announced by the Biden administration targeting Russia, 500 different people and entities. But perhaps what's notable is what was not gone after: energy and metals, commodities that maybe could impact the U.S. economy if Russia were to be hampered in producing them.
Yeah, this is interesting because we spent so many months over the past 2 years talking about whether we have done everything we can in terms of sanctions. Apparently, there was a lot left to do. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed the new sanctions on Russia today. Here he is.
Today, the United States government, in coordination with many allies and partners, is taking additional new measures to respond to Russia's full-scale war and intensifying repression at home by sanctioning and imposing export control restrictions on more than 500 individuals and entities. That is the largest number of designations that we've yet taken in a single Russia-related action.
Joining us now for more are Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Wendy Benjaminson. So, Wendy, just to begin with you, as he noted, this was a massive number of different things they were going after here, but there were things they decided not to go after. Energy, which Russia is basically producing and selling to fund the war, and the U.S. has decided not to do that. Is that just a domestic political calculation?
Yes. In a short answer, I mean, there's hurting Russia and there's winning re-election, and both of these things to the White House have to happen. And if gas prices were to spike right now, as we're going into the summer months, that would be bad. Donald Trump would make hay of it. And if prices for aluminum and other things went up, that would affect so many products around the world that would. That would also be a tough political road for Joe Biden right now. So part of it is also, obviously, to keep prices from going up for the good of people, but it is a political calculation, absolutely. And,
of course, driven through the Treasury Department. We spoke earlier today on Bloomberg with the Deputy Treasury Secretary, Wally Adeyemo, here on Bloomberg. Here's what he said.
It's important to remember that our objective remains the same: going after Russia's military-industrialized complex and their ability to earn money to prop up their economy and buy the goods they need to fight the war they want. What we're doing today is we are furthering those actions by going after companies in Russia that are helping to build military equipment.
You spoke with our colleagues on Bloomberg Surveillance earlier. Wendy, why wait 2 years to do this when the message was we're doing all we can?
That's right. I think the impetus was more to help Ukraine. The trouble is that war is good for economies. And Russia's economy its GDP has actually expanded in the last 2 years because it's been spending so much money ramping up its military capabilities and fighting the war, and that creates a lot of need and a lot of purchasing and all of that. Yep. So that, was one reason maybe they decided to clamp down now. Also, the death of Alexei Navalny. That was a massive event, a real show of Putin's ability to thwart any opposition that I think was met with such global outrage that they just decided this was the time to do it.
Well, and of course, as we talk about the time to do these things, it's also worth noting that at this time, it's not clear if Congress is going to be passing additional aid to Ukraine as this war enters its third year. And Megan, Majority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is in Ukraine right now. I'm assuming making the case, trying to tell President Vladimir Zelensky that the U.S. is not going to leave Ukraine behind. And yet, might we Is that what this ultimately looks like right now?
It's certainly a difficult case to make right now. Schumer today, when he was speaking in Ukraine, really tried to put the pressure on Speaker Johnson, invited him, asked him, implored him to come to Ukraine to see what was happening in the country as Russia mounts its offensive. Schumer's going to come back to Washington, and he's going to probably be met with a no from House Republicans, who will also be returning to Washington this week. There's still the issue of the border, and what Mike Johnson has said is that they will not move on Ukraine unless they get all of their demands on the border, which is above and beyond anything the Senate Democrats would agree to.
As opposed to a compromise.
Yes.
It's not lost on us that the majority leader has brought a delegation of all Democrats to Ukraine. And no surprise to see names like Jack Reed, Richard Blumenthal. He's got Michael Bennet and Maggie Hassan with him as well. Wouldn't it have sent a message to have a bipartisan delegation here?
So what we saw in the weeks leading up to this trip was that sort of bipartisan support for Ukraine, not necessarily falling away. You know, you still have Mitch McConnell supporting this, but they're very worried about going up too close. And a lot of this has to do with, as Wendy said, the election. We are coming up on the election. Donald Trump does not want this to happen. Hardliners in the House do not want this to happen. The Republican Party already looks like a very fractious party right now. And to try to keep some semblance of unity, you're seeing this sort of break away, which is only going to make it more difficult to get Ukraine aid to pass both chambers of Congress.
Well, Wendy, Megan brings up Donald Trump and the fact that this is an election year, and the next real contest is tomorrow in South Carolina, where if polls are to be believed, Donald Trump is going to crush the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, in her home state. Yet she says she's staying in this thing no matter what. Is there a margin that would be just too bruising to her to continue?
I don't think so. I mean, losing is losing. She is most likely going to lose. All of our reporting and polling suggests that she will. But she has a lot of money coming from a lot of very deep-pocketed donors on Wall Street and other places. And they have given her this money to keep up the case against Donald Trump. And so she will keep making this argument, sometimes shouting into the void, it seems like she is in her own state. But she will keep doing it at least until Super Tuesday, which is, 2 weeks from now. Then she may look at it and say, this is ridiculous. Also, remember, she's keeping her name out there for possibly a third-party run. She says she wouldn't, but she also said she wouldn't run against Trump. Possibly 2028. She's only 52, so she has 30 or 40 years left to run for president. And, so there's a lot of reason to keep talking.
We'll have the young candidate controversy at some point, I'm sure. Thanks to Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Wendy Benjaminson for getting us started with Smart Talk tonight. Coming up, New Jersey Congressman Bill Pascrell will join us to talk more about options that Democrats have to pass aid for Ukraine in a Republican-controlled House. We'll get into that next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think a discharge petition that had Israel and Ukraine and perhaps the entire Senate bill, which is what I would support, would get the signature of almost every Democrat. And we would still need more. We wouldn't just need 3 Republicans. We'd need 15 or 20 Republicans. But there are literally hundreds of Republicans who want to see us aid both Israel and Ukraine. And the question is, are they willing to sign a discharge petition?
That was Congressman Brad Sherman of California talking with us at this time yesterday about the maneuver that many Democrats are suggesting they may want to use to pass aid for Ukraine in the House. He was, of course, speaking to it there along with a dose of reality.
I think in my 28 years in Congress, only 2 have been successful, and one of those was actually supported by the Speaker. So you really only one time in my 28 years has a bill come to the floor and passed when the Speaker didn't want to have us vote on it.
Let's get into it now with Congressman Bill Pascrell from New Jersey, who seemed to help to float the idea publicly yesterday, saying in a social media post, coming soon, Democrats will introduce a discharge petition to bring Ukraine funding to the House floor. I will be online to sign it. Congressman Pascrell joins us now, and it's good to see you, Congressman. Now that we've established this is a difficult maneuver and as a result a pretty rare one, do you think that your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, will endorse the effort?
Well, Joe, we're willing to try anything at this point. As we've done in the past, we'll do again. We need to make sure that we keep this a hot issue every day. It is critical. It's a critical issue to the security of America. It's a security issue with all the countries that surround the Ukraine, be it Poland or the Balkan countries. It doesn't matter. This is a symbol, but it's very tangible. You can see, you could feel it every day. People are being slaughtered every day, and the Ukraine has a right to defend itself, but it needs the equipment. It needs materials in order to defend itself, and the United States is a major part of that. So whether it's a discharge petition or the House Speaker gets some guts and worries more about the security of the nation than the security of his own job, we'll have a different kind of thing. It's in a tough situation. We want to help him, but we're not going to go away and we're not going to yield.
Well, sir, of course, it's not just Ukraine aid that is at stake here. It's aid for Israel as well. And as we talk about perhaps Republican reluctance to support the Ukraine aid in particular, how much Democratic reluctance will there be to unconditionally support Israel, given the very high civilian casualties we are seeing in Gaza?
Well, Kayleigh, it's very interesting that it's come down to, as your question would indicate, Ukrainians versus the Israelis. And the United States has made a very, very strong decision. The administration has, and many of us in the Congress. And that is regardless of where we were before, and regardless of what we feel, how deeply we feel about the loss of Palestinian lives, that we made a decision on October the 7th that Israel reaffirms, we reaffirm Israel has a right to defend itself. And we've made that decision. But the other side, which is, look, they got a history of games over the last year and 2 months. The fact of the matter is we need both of these. They're both critical for the United States. I would say Ukraine is even more critical in terms of our own security. That doesn't make the Israeli situation any less important, not at all. I think we do both of these things. I think the package was an excellent one that was put together by the Senate. There were compromises in there. There was even a part on immigration, and we're not even going to get to that. Here we are, told to say, let's get together. We'll come up with an immigration policy, which we haven't done. There have been many times in the past 10, 15 years that we've had legislation that can't get through because for this little minor detail or that major detail. We can work together. I think the senator from the Republicans worked very hard, and so did Mr. Schumer. They've come up with, I think, and their aides have come up, I think, with a very good solution to this, to work together to have the aid for all of these. And to leave anything out, which has been done in the past, is not going to work. It doesn't help Israel.
Let me ask you this then.
And it doesn't help Ukraine.
Congressman, your speaker wants to cut them up, though, bring a Ukraine funding bill to the floor. You've already seen an Israel funding bill come to the floor, and that didn't play out so well. And then I suspect there'd be a third one for Indo-Pac and Taiwan. Do you have the numbers to pass those on an individual basis?
I think we do. And it would seem to me, we just had for instance, a press conference before we left last week, and Republicans were there. Joe Wilson was there, very, very conservative, but he loves his country, and he understands how critical this is for the security of your country. It's not enough to say you're for America or you support the United States. You got to do something about it. And if you're going to get instructions from outside, then that's not going to make a good solution at the end when it comes time to vote. And that's the situation that we are in now. You got to stand up for America, and now's the time to vote for all of these factors that are considered in security for our greatest country.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for your time this evening. We appreciate it. That's Democratic Congressman Bill Pascrell from New Jersey. Now, coming up, we're turning to the 2024 presidential race and digging into the numbers behind one key demographic, women over the age of 50. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. With the 2024 election cycle in full swing, the latest contest, of course, coming tomorrow in South Carolina, a new poll from the AARP shows women over the age of 50 are narrowly divided over who they'd prefer for president, but they do have some major concerns in common. Here now to discuss what's keeping older voters heading to or away from the polls, Margie Omero, a principal at the Democratic polling firm GBAO. So, Margie, thanks so much for coming on the show. According to this data, essentially, when you look at women over 50, there are more who would vote for Biden, but the margin is quite narrow, and it's basically tied when it comes to down ballot races. What's going to decide the minds of these voters?
Well, I think it's important. First of all, this is a bipartisan poll conducted myself along with Kristen Soltis-Anderson, a Republican pollster. And this group is very much up for grabs. They're politically evenly divided, kind of like the country overall. And I think it's important to remember that they're still a long way away. And this audience has a lot of things that they really want to be heard. You have a majority of women over 50 who say they don't feel listened to by our elected officials. Overwhelming, over 80% say they want to see elected officials give more support to caregivers. Many of the women in this audience are caregivers or have been caregivers. And what they say is on their mind are things like cost of living, managing with daily life. A pretty sizable number say that they don't feel as financially well off as they thought that they would at this time in their life. And so I think it's important for any candidate running for any office to make this audience feel heard and listened and appreciated, not just about their finances and the financial struggles that they face, but also just in their daily life and getting all the things done that they want to in their life.
Well, it's helpful to find some nuance here in your research, Margie, because it strikes me that we talk about female voters or women voters as this monolith in a way that we don't with men. We don't hear so much about Trump leading with the male vote. Even if that's true, it's normally broken down into college-educated or non-college-educated, suburban, however you're going to frame these groups of people. How should we be talking about female voters in America?
It is so important. It's such a good question. It's such a diverse audience. And so it includes, over 50 women who just turned 50. It includes women who are at a different stage of their life who may be retired. So you have some people in this audience who say they don't feel as stressed or exhausted as maybe voters overall feel because some of them are working less. Other folks feel incredibly stretched thin. We did a segmentation, a cluster analysis, and there was one group that we called the rubber bands because they feel really, stretched very thin because they're juggling a lot of different responsibilities at the same time while working. We did focus groups with a variety of different women in this audience a couple months ago, and they said things like, I had to quit working in order to take care of my parents. I thought they were going to live forever, and now I can't afford the basics. So it's really important that we look at everything that this population really has to say and what they're experiencing. The one thing that was pretty interesting, and they're definitely not a monolith for sure, but one thing that was pretty interesting is compared to voters overall, they are more likely to say, I never share on social media my views on politics. Like that's just not a thing that I do. And so it would be a mistake to assume that not sharing means I don't care or I don't want my opinion heard.
Well, Margie, it also strikes me that this age demographic we're talking about, 50 plus, would be considered out of the typical reproductive age range. And as we consider just the developments in the last week, the Alabama Supreme Court ruling that potentially threatens IVF treatments in that state, it raises once again the potential political ramifications of the Dobbs decision, to what extent that's going to galvanize voters as they head to the polls, either in the primaries or in November. Is that universal across all women, or how do you see that showing up within different age demographics?
So we saw in this poll, we asked about views on abortion rights, and a majority of women over 50 support the right to an abortion. That's very much like voters overall. This is something that not just the work with AARP, but the work we've done and lots of other public polling shows that there's broad majority support for abortion rights. When asked, what's the most important? What do you think is the most important issue facing the country? Abortion was much lower with this population from a long list, and cost of living, the economy was much higher. And I think you see a lot of women in this audience feeling worried about how divided we are politically. This is not to say that abortion may not be an issue for some women over 50. Certainly in the work that we've done with candidates in 2022, it was very important in a lot of those races to all kinds of different voters. I think it's important for women over 50 in terms of what they're experiencing. They're experiencing at this moment concerns about caregiving and their own economic security. And those are the things that they tell us are on their mind right this minute.
Just remarkable number that jumps off the page here, Marjorie. 75%, this again is women aged 50 to 64, say politicians in Washington don't listen to the views of people like them. When you consider a statement like that and some of the issues that you've drilled down on in your research here, are you surprised that Nikki Haley hasn't found more traction?
Well, that's Republican primary voters in some states. This is with all women over 50 across the board. So, so it's a bit of a different question. It's not a surprise to me that women over 50 feel not listened to or not heard. We've seen this in focus groups where we asked in previous focus groups, how do you feel? And do you feel that people listen to, folks like you? And in every group, no matter whether it was with Republican women, Democratic women, independent women, white women, Black women, Latino women, AAPI women, we did a variety of different groups. And in every group, these women would say, I feel invisible. I feel invisible, not just to elected officials. I feel invisible when I walk down the street. When I go to the office, we were talking before I came on about, working from home. There were some women who said, I went back to the office and I was wearing my business clothes, and all the younger people looked at me like I was crazy. I don't even know what to wear anymore. And so it was, it's something that comes up in a lot of different walks of life.
Well, we really appreciate your bringing this research to us, Margie. Again, a great conversation. Margie Omero, GBAO, we thank you for the time today on Bloomberg. Coming up, it's been 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We'll have more next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Two years ago, shortly before dawn, Russian troops marched across the border in Ukraine. And Putin believed he could easily bend the will and break the resolve of the free people of Ukraine. That he could roll into Ukraine and he would roll over them. 2 years later, he remains wrong. We in the United States are going to continue to ensure that Putin pays the price for his aggression abroad and repression at home.
President Biden earlier today, on this eve of the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Joining us now is Jane Harman, chair of the National Defense Strategy Commission, former 9-term congresswoman from California. Jane, it's great to see you as always. As we consider the calendar here and the announcement from the Biden administration today that more sanctions are coming, the biggest one-day round that we've seen, it does make you wonder if these sanctions will do what the others did not, and that's change Vladimir Putin's behavior.
Well, I see no chance that his intentions will change. His behavior would change only if he ran out of weapons and his economy crashed. I mean, that's kind of where it is. These sanctions will make some difference, but let's understand that China is Russia's back door. and is helping Russia's economy, is helping it replenish its conventional weapons, which were decimated in the first year of the war. And we have to, mandatory, provide this funding that Ukraine is seeking yesterday. And President Biden is saying this, but sadly it is not happening. Special session, my view, certainly the House, and there needs to be a discharge petition to force 218 people to put the money bill on the House floor. This could happen. The House is in recess at the moment, unfortunately, sadly. Chuck Schumer is in Kyiv with 4 senators, but they're all Democrats, and they've already passed their bill. So just would say that it's urgent now to get weapons and other supplies to Ukraine.
But the question remains, Jane, is whether or not those weapons will actually make an immediate difference in a war that is looking more and more like a war of attrition. And even if the discharge petition were to work, if this $60 billion gets through, it's not guaranteed that more money will get through again in the future. And as we enter the 3rd year of this war, I wonder for how much longer you expect Ukraine is going to need the support of the United States on this.
Well, I think it depends on whether the weapons come now. If they're long-range fires and they can take out Russian installations in Ukraine, in Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, that would be very helpful. There's a German weapon that might be able to take out the Kerch Bridge, which is the landline between Russia and Crimea. So if these weapons are effective, that will make a big difference. They're also, obviously, the people in the trenches are running out of ammo, and it's so sad that the defense industrial base in the West has been unable to resupply them. But I think, yes, more weapons can make a big difference immediately, and I think it's urgent to do this. And letting Russia play this role much longer is enormously harmful to the future of the United States. We're going to end up in a war, in a war with Russia in Europe or somehow if we don't stop Russia now.
Well, that's something that is very real, too. Radoslaw Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, joined us around this time yesterday, Jane, and spoke to the matter of NATO and its future as an alliance if we do have a second Donald Trump term. Here's what he said, and we'll have you respond.
Let me just remind you that Article 5 has only been invoked once so far, after 9/11. And we all rallied round. Poland sent a brigade to Ghazni, a tough province in Afghanistan, and we didn't send an invoice to Washington. The military alliance is not a neighborhood security company.
Jane, should Europe be nervous about what's going to happen in November?
Europe is nervous. I was just at the Munich Security Conference along with Radek Sikorski and with Zelensky, who did a masterful job, and in the tragedy of the Navalny murder, seeing his widow speak to us just, probably 30 feet from me was astoundingly touching and dire. So NATO is strong. I think I'm more bullish about NATO holding the line than I am about the United States Congress providing the money, tragically. So I think that the U.S. will not pull out of NATO. The issue will be, will all the countries pay more in dues? And I do think that challenge is out there. I know former President Trump made it, but I do think they are going to pay more dues. And NATO will have more resources to respond properly, as it did after 9/11.
Well, of course, as we think about a U.S. alliance in Europe and one geopolitical conflict that is active, there also, of course, is the conflict in the Middle East ongoing between Israel and Hamas. And we heard the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking about this earlier today, and it seems we have a change in policy on our hands. Just take a listen to him at a press conference in Buenos Aires.
It's been longstanding U.S. policy under Republican and Democratic administrations alike that new settlements are counterproductive to reaching an enduring peace. They're also inconsistent with international law. Our administration maintains a firm opposition to settlement expansion. And in our judgment, this only weakens, doesn't strengthen Israel's security.
So we have the Secretary of State saying that Israeli settlements are inconsistent with international law. We have also seen a language change. The Security Council resolution the U.S. has put forward does call for a temporary ceasefire, not a pause, as we were hearing earlier on in this conflict. It does seem that the administration is starting to sharpen its views of Israel, perhaps, or at least change them. How would you characterize how we're seeing the Biden administration approaching the relationship with Israel and Netanyahu specifically now?
Well, it has been long-standing U.S. policy to support two states. This isn't new. It's been long-standing U.S. policy that two states need a reasonable border, the 67 lines with swaps. So extra settlements are making that more difficult. That's exactly what Secretary Blinken said. Trump tried to change that policy, and I think the result has been very harmful. What do I think about the rest of it? I think a temporary ceasefire in exchange for the hostages, that wasn't mentioned, is what's crucial. Getting the hostages back has to be step one. But longer term, Israel's security will only be guaranteed by two states living side by side with a demilitarization of Gaza and responsible governments in the West Bank or in the Palestinian Authority, which would include the West Bank, plus in Israel, both of which support two states. That's the only way Israel will be truly secure in the future.
CIA Director Burns is back in the region. Jane, is he the key to unlocking another deal here?
Yes, I think so. He's widely trusted. He's extremely experienced, and he's there, I assume, focusing on a hostage deal. I mean, it's a tricky thing when you think about the fact that the leader of the military part of the West Bank, this guy Sinwar, was part of a hostage release to get back one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, some years ago. And so Israel is reasonably uneasy about swapping prisoners. On the other hand, getting the hostages back has to be the centerpiece of regaining the trust of the Israeli public for the deal that has to be made over time, which is steps toward a two-state solution, including demilitarization of the West Bank and responsible governments.
All right, Jane, always great to have you join us with your perspective. We appreciate your time. Jane Harman, chair of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy. Now, coming up, Washington is bracing for Congress to potentially stumble into a shutdown by the end of next week. We'll be joined with our political panel next on what to expect. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Within a week, the potential shutdown of the government, and then a week after that, a larger potential shutdown of the government. And that is combined with the press that the Senate has now put on the House of Representatives on the foreign aid package. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but what I see in the markets today and the business world is almost trying to tune out that noise, because people feel like at the end of the day, Washington will figure it out.
That was Eric Cantor, Moelis & Company Vice Chairman and former House Majority Leader, speaking yesterday to Bloomberg's David Weston. And you can catch more of that conversation tonight on Wall Street Week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. But joining us in real time right now is our political panel, Lester Munson, International BGR Government Affairs Principal, and Jeannie Shanzano, Political Science Professor at Iona University. So we just heard Lester, Mr. Cantor there, say people feel like at the end of the day, Washington will figure it out. A week from now, week and 6 hours from now, perhaps, will be the deadline to try to get funding to keep the government open. Are we really confident they're going to figure this out?
No, I don't think we are. There are all kinds of rumors out there now that they're going to do a short-term CR into the end of March and maybe give themselves a little more breathing room to get this work done. There's still a ton of policy questions that even the House Republican Conference itself can't settle, much less then talk to Democrats and try and get them to agree to some sort of way forward, because they're going to need some Democratic votes for a lot of these. So it's really very chaotic.
Well, it's really something, Jeannie. I don't see countdown clocks running anywhere. We don't have one down in the corner here at the moment, at least. Wall Street seems to think this will resolve itself because it always tends to work out that way. Is Washington about to prove them wrong?
Yeah, it's fascinating because, I think for all of us, it feels like, we keep coming back here where Congress can't get it done, and in the end, they pull it through. I think we have to remember that there's some unique circumstances here. I mean, for one, we're in our first laddered CR, so we get a potentially partial shutdown on the end of the day on the 1st and then the 8th. And, as we recall, the idea with the Fiscal Responsibility Act was this was all supposed to sort of, these automatic cuts on April 30th was supposed to sort of push members to being, to sort of be incentivized to move forward on getting these bills passed. And if anything, it's done the opposite. You now have conservatives who are saying, forget it. If you can't get all the cuts you need, just wait till April 30th and allow all of those automatic cuts to go through. So there's a lot new here. I do think we have a shutdown, if only because of the clock. There is no way the House comes back late Wednesday afternoon and gets all of this done, even if we see an outline of a potential deal on Sunday.
Well, Jeannie, that's not the only thing that's new here. The speaker's pretty new as well. He was essentially vaulted to the top of leadership, the third most important individual, arguably, in Washington, from being a backbencher in the House. Is this a Mike Johnson issue? How do we diagnose the inability, it seems, of the House to figure out not just this issue, but the supplemental, you name it? We've seen plenty of rules go down on the floor, too.
Yeah, I mean, with the supplemental, that clearly is bottlenecked at the top, so some of the blame has to lie with Mike Johnson. But, I am empathetic to the situation he is in because he is not the first, nor if we don't have some reforms, will he be the last. I mean, we have seen repeated speakers in the modern era in the exact position. And of course, it's much worse for Mike Johnson because now he has just a 2-vote margin. And of course, as you mentioned, Kayleigh, he is incredibly new. So you couple all those things together, this gets a lot harder. But Mike Johnson, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, is going to face the biggest test of his political life. How does he move this forward? And I have to say, I was chuckling a bit at the Freedom Caucus sort of pinning the leadership down on what's going to happen with the spending bills. They are the reason we are in a lot of this position, and yet they seem to want to keep just hitting this leadership and Mike Johnson in particular over the head.
What a time to be alive. Lester, this is the backdrop for the State of the Union address. Less than 2 weeks from now, what's Joe Biden going to say?
Well, I think he's got to show up. He's got to read his lines. He's got to execute an exit from the stage in a reasonable way, and then I think he can kind of declare victory. He can demonstrate competence with not much of an effort here.
Will he be booed again?
It's a great question. I'm sure there's going to be some people who are a little bit hostile to him. I'd be watching House Democratic progressives to see where they are. They're a little bit concerned about the Middle East policy right now. They're probably the ones who are most irritated with him, perhaps even more than Republicans.
Might stay standing, or stay sitting, rather, while others are standing during the Israel component. That'll be something to watch. Coming up, we stick with our panel, Lester and Jeannie, as we look ahead to the South Carolina primary. That's tomorrow. We'll have more of the panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Michael and I can handle it. When you're in politics, it's open season. But you mock one member of the military, you're mocking every member of the military.
Yeah, my son too.
But the problem is, he doesn't understand that sacrifice. This is a pattern. We saw that he said members of the military who lose their lives, they're suckers or losers. He says at the Arlington National Cemetery, what was in it for them? He doesn't understand that for our men and women who serve, it's not about them.
Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley earlier today in South Carolina with a new line of attack against Donald Trump. Back with us, our political panel on the eve of the South Carolina primary. Lester Munson is here, International BGR Government Affairs Principal, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Here we go, Lester. South Carolina, we've been waiting 4 weeks, and it looks like it's going to be a very bad day for Nikki Haley in her home state. How does she crawl out of South Carolina on the Super Tuesday if she's losing by somewhere between 20 and 30 points?
If it's 30 points, I think she's going to be very badly damaged and maybe can't go on. I think if it's less than 20, if she can somehow get this thing to 12 or 15 points, that doesn't look terrible to me. That can kind of justify her continuing to deliver this message of an alternative to Trump. It's probably going to inspire her donors a little bit, so it might sustain her for a couple more weeks. Maybe it gets her to Super Tuesday, but it's the window is closing.
So, Jeannie, does that make the margin the only real thing we can learn from South Carolina? Because as Joe says, we've been preparing for weeks for this to be a blowout on the part of Donald Trump. It seems like we all basically know the gist of the outcome here. What can South Carolina actually teach us?
Yeah, I mean, unless there is a surprise that is huge, then we are looking at a big blowout on Donald Trump's part. I mean, she might walk away losing every single district, which is incredible considering she's a two-time governor. You know, I think the big question coming out of South Carolina is, number one, what is Nikki Haley thinking in terms of her future? What is the end game here, if you will? And then I think number two, you know, we are really moving very quickly into the general election. Donald Trump seems on the verge of turning all of his fire onto Joe Biden. And so, you know, I'm a little bit in mourning. I don't know about you guys, but I sort of miss the old primaries and caucuses where it was contested for a long time. This is, you know, I think horrible that it feels like ho-hum, it's, you know, just another day and we know the outcome. So, you know, I don't think it's great, but this is where we are in 2024.
Well, it certainly felt odd being in New Hampshire, right, Jeannie, when there was no carnival that came along with the primary. And to your point, we didn't have a handful of candidates crisscrossing. There was a sense of inevitability. Certainly on the Republican side, it got a little bit weird on the Democratic side with what was a write-in campaign for Joe Biden. And today we've learned about Paul Carpenter. This has got to be the best story of the week here. A New Orleans-based magician who is known for his work as a fork bender and apparently has a knack for getting out of straitjackets. He was hired by a guy named Steve Kramer who did ballot work for Dean Phillips. Remember, the Democrat who's actually still technically running against Joe Biden. He was hired to make this AI ad using a fake Joe Biden voice, use software to make the imitation of his voice. He says it took less than 20 minutes and it cost only $1, Jeannie. He was paid $150. If this stuff is happening now, where are we going to be in 6 months when it comes to deep fakes and AI on the trail?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get bad. You know, I was just looking, you know, Georgia has already, you know, is working on a bill. North Carolina is working on a bill. The federal government hopefully gets their act together because this is going to be the reality. We remember last November, we saw a lot of this on both sides of the aisle. So it is going to be a problem. Disinformation, to Sam Altman's point, is going to run rampant, and it does have an impact on democracy. I'm just fascinated, though, by the fact that they found a magician in New Orleans to do this.
Right.
I don't get that.
Why that person?
Not just any magician.
I don't know. I guess maybe AI is some kind of intelligent magic. But Joe mentioned that this was someone who was working on the part of Dean Phillips, even if Dean Phillips maybe was not aware, because we actually asked Congressman Phillips about this when it happened, live in New Hampshire, and he was talking about the risks of deepfakes and his answer to us. Let's just remind ourselves.
I don't know who's behind that. I think it's appalling. And I think here's the bigger issue. There was an outside group that also did a bot for Dean. I think it was called DeanBot, which is now taken down. But here's the real issue. The Biden administration has known that AI is coming down the pipeline. They understand the risks of deep fakes and have done almost nothing to secure us from it.
So he didn't know at the time who was behind it. I guess based on NBC News' reporting, we do now know, Lester. But to his point about that we all know what the risks of deep fakes are and that nothing yet has been done to secure us from it, is it too late at this point in the cycle? I mean, what can we do that's going to save us by November?
Well, I don't think it's too late for Americans to have healthy skepticism about campaign messages, even when they're coming from a guy who is the world fork-bending champion, who would seem to be a wonderful qualification for some campaign messages.
Yes.
Someone you want to take seriously. But I think voters, it doesn't cost you anything to be skeptical. Think twice, do a little research, look into it. If it seems a little odd, maybe it is.
Dean Bot, Jeannie, we've never really gotten into this. Would the real Dean Phillips stand up?
Yeah, I think we need to hear more about this. And also, let's just add that the guy who apparently hired the magician worked for Kanye West. That's my favorite part of this story, besides the fork bending.
Yes.
So he's
well,
really...
I understand the Easy campaign has been a feedstock for Democratic campaign staffers. We have to be clear, though, to your point, Kayleigh. Dean Phillips says he knew nothing, and they expressed outrage when they were asked about this story.
Yes, they did.
To be clear.
And on that note, we're going to leave it. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Lester Munson, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday evening. And of course, for more coverage of fork benders and everything else going on in Washington, check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find that at the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We are human beings. We'll see you back here next week. This is Bloomberg.